Hello and welcome to the Gold, Ghosts, and Guns podcast for today, Tuesday, October 27th, 2020. My name is Tom Luongo, and we have a lot to talk about. Today, it's episode 56, and I've got with me Patrick Henningsen from 21st Century Wire. We're going to talk the U.S. elections, and we put this together real quick. Patrick and I are doing this on Monday morning, so let's just get started. Patrick, how are you? It's been a while. Let's catch up, man. How have you been?
Yeah. Hey, I'm okay. We're busy here. So we're
Right.
busy looking at this side of the Atlantic and then looking back over at what's happening in the United States as well.
Great. So I'm sure I was watching the latest thing you put out on 21st Century Wire, your election watch thing that you did, the video you did going over each of the battleground states. And I found it really good. It's very similar to my thoughts on what's happening in a lot of these battleground states, and it was good information about digging in behind the polls, right? So
Yes,
the polls are nonsense. So let's talk about that. What do you think is going on in the election before we go? What do you at this point? How far off do you think the polls are, and what do you bottom line, where do you think Trump stands in all this?
Well, I think it's a question of which polls as well, because some polls they appear to be more accurate than others. Right. And so, like, I'm a really practical guy, Tom. I'm like, I didn't score very high in mathematics in high school, and I barely passed in college. So, and on the SAT, I wasn't that great at math. But what I was good at, I surprisingly, I did better in statistics than I did in math, which shows you I didn't get a high grade in statistics. But I learned about margin of error when I was really a lot younger, and sample sizes and stuff like that, and it always stuck with me. I had a great teacher at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, and so I know the basics of what to look at. And I started looking at these polls, and I look at the sample sizes, and I thought for a nationwide opinion poll, they're running samples at like 1,000, 1,500. I'm like, how could you make any declarations based on, in a country the size of the U.S. based on sample sizes like that? I mean, there can be no reliability at all. So I looked at those, and I looked at some of the methodology of some of the mainstream polling, and it just seems impossible looking at the past performance of national polls and national opinion polls, especially, of course, 2016. So being not super sophisticated in data analytics and mathematics, I looked at the candidate, which is Joe Biden, and I looked at the Republican candidate, and it's Donald Trump. So it's almost, to me, it's almost an identical ticket to 2016. The only difference is the gender of the Democratic nominee, okay, right, and maybe the age. But it's pretty much the same policies, same base, same demographics, same Bernie Sanders element injected into this year as last time. So you have this disgruntled, split off breakaway wing of the Democratic Party that may or may not support the Democratic nominee, maybe less so now. So I just kind of poured all those things into a kind of algorithm, along with a few other factors and variables, looking at momentum. So we're looking at key factors, which are things that you can read on the surface. Then we're looking at dark matter, which is things that exist but can't be picked up by mainstream polls and media analysts, not readily anyway. And momentum only appears in the last couple of weeks. So right, in a way, momentum renders everything that happened before October, let's say 14th, almost kind of meaningless. And that's just the nature of the election. So you realize what a sham the mainstream media is, and all the mainstream pollsters, that they run all this stuff all summer, and they're doing all the same song and dance. And so my question is the system so delusional and so not fit for purpose that they would actually make the same mistakes again in 2016 that they made in 2016? Would they do that again only 4 years later in 2020? And I'm of the opinion, Tom, that it is that corrupt, they are that delusional, and they are making the identically same mistakes as before. It's deadly. I'll tell you why it's deadly. Because if you false project a lead or a landslide lead all summer, then it's absolutely going to benefit the other side. who's not the beneficiary of such grand projections. So it's going to hurt Joe Biden and benefit Trump, because a lot of people it doesn't motivate voters that you have a landslide poll numbers all summer.
Right.
It means people are going to stay home.
Yep.
So it's going to benefit Trump. So as the insurgent, as the underdog, it gives him underdog bona fides when maybe he doesn't need them, but he's getting them anyway.
Yeah, and he's the incumbent.
Yeah, go ahead.
Right. No, I was going to say, and I'm FYI, I do have a background in mathematics and statistics. I did do very well. I mean, I have a degree in chemistry, and I've spent 25 years as a bench chemist, and I've forgotten more about data analysis than most people doing polling have ever learned in their lives. And looking at the quality of the polls, I can feel comfortable saying that. So I look at these polls and I look at what's happening, and the people like Nate Silver and others who forget that the first rule of data is garbage in equals garbage out. GIGO is literally the first law of data. If you've got bad data and you manipulate it honestly, you still get bad results. It's just it's a simple logic, right? Truth followed by a falsity, or falsity followed by a truth, is still false. It doesn't matter, right? So, watching all this play out, I think they are that corrupt. I think that knowing what we know now about COVID-19, what I call the corona apocalypse, and all the rest of it, and how they're also rolling out at the same time all of this huge push for the World Economic Forum's Great Reset. It's all very obvious what the narrative is, and they're just telling you a story. This is a bedtime story. Sleepy Joe Biden is going to win the election and usher in global communism, and we're going to repudiate capitalism, or we're going to make the world a better place. Isn't that great, friend citizen? I mean, that's literally the thing that they're running towards, the story that they're running here, and that all we have to do is defeat the orcs, who are the Donald Trump crowd and the Boris Johnson crowd. That's all we have to do. We just have to defeat them, however, and make you feel self-righteous for doing so. And that's where we are. And so they've created this. What's really dangerous from my perspective, I agree with you completely that from a voter turnout perspective, this is bad for Joe Biden, because Biden's got this in the bag. Oh yeah, I forgot to vote. Yeah, but looking at the turnout numbers here in the U.S., I don't think that's much of an issue, because I think it's going to be an unbelievably high turnout. I mean, It could have been a couple of points higher if they hadn't played this game. But the last thing to say here is that I also think it also hurts the country in the long run, because it's setting up the post-election narrative that Trump stole the election.
Yes.
It sets up the horrible expectation that we were supposed to win, and they're different today than they were 4 years ago. The mood is different today. When I was on election night 4 years ago, and I'll turn this back over to you in just a second. When I was on election night 4 years ago, I was at my friendly local gaming store, and I was playing board game with a bunch of my friends. The woman who ran the store is a huge Hillary supporter. She's huge and into politics and everything else. And we're, of course, on opposite sides of the political spectrum. We liked each other well enough. She turned the entire store into, an election party. They ordered pizza. They had televisions everywhere. There were 50 people in the store. We were the only ones playing any board game. There was 4 of us. And I'm sitting there and I'm watching the election results come in. And once the panhandle came in and they called the state for Trump, the tears started. The room got quiet. It was a party atmosphere up until about 8:20, and then everybody just deflated because they knew losing Florida was it. And Pennsylvania hadn't been called yet, but they knew Florida was done. And I looked for another friend of mine who's vaguely libertarian, and he looked at me and I went, I told you he was going to. I mean, my face said, I told you he was going to win. And then we got finished playing, and I went home and then cackled the entire way on my way home, chatting with a friend of mine. And then the next day, or the next time I came into the store, I was talking with the store owner, and I was very conciliatory in winning, right? And trying to, they were bereft, and they were grief stricken, right? And there was the first stage of grief. They hadn't got the anger yet. Okay, they're trapped in anger today because they've been stoked for 4 years that Trump stole the election, and now they whipped them up, and these evil people who run the media and the World Economic Forum and all the rest of it, whip them up into this frenzy of anger that they're going to unleash on us after the election is over, if Trump wins.
Yeah. So you're very astute to point out that that's the other byproduct of this fake landslide lead in national polls and so forth is it sets up the post-election narrative. And so that's exactly what happened in 2016. The majority of Democrats, Hillary Clinton supporters, they have the false impression after the Russia narrative was injected into the media and into the political discourse. They had the idea that this was stolen from Hillary, stolen from the Democrats, stolen from the good people by Trump and the Russians. So here you have that could very well happen. I mean, I'm just looking at the key battleground states because it's so polarized in America that there's certain states that are going to go blue and there's nothing you can do about it, and there's certain states that are going to go red and there's nothing you can do about it. Well, we looked at quite a few more battleground states this time around in 2020 than in 2016. So we counted I set up to 15 battleground states and about 7 really close, like extremely close states. So if it does swing the way it looks like it's going to swing in a lot of these battleground states, and I believe that it will in at least half of them, because there has to be something that's going to move the dial to change the results of 2016, like something massive. It's either more new voter registration, or there has to be something. And in some of the battleground states, the Republicans, the GOP new voter registration outpaced the Democrats by a handy margin. So I'm going to hand. I mean, Florida is one of those states, Tom, and so is North Carolina and Pennsylvania. Okay, so that trifecta right there means that Donald Trump has won the nomination. So I mean, what are you seeing in Florida now? Because the new voter registration numbers are big. The early vote was big for the Democrats, but not big enough to sort of outpace the GOP in-person voting on the day, on November 3rd. So it could be a situation, Tom, where Donald Trump would win on the day, and then comes the post-election chaos, which is court cases, which is Al Franken times 6, 7, 8 riots after that, and then calls for the president to step down for the good of the country. Angela Merkel weighs in. Well, the European leaders weigh in. We have to.
They're all against Trump because they're the main beneficiaries of the post-election chaos here in the United States. What I'm hearing here in Florida is that Trump will win Florida. I'm telling you right now, he'll win between 5 and 7 points.
Wow,
easily.
That's
easily.
Huge.
Knowing
that's huge.
what I'm seeing in the county by county early voting numbers, he's ahead in early voting numbers in Miami-Dade.
No, seriously, that's huge.
Yeah. No, Joe Cotto of the Cotto Godfrey blog is going over those numbers on a daily basis. And so is Larry Schweikert. And on a county by county basis, Trump has already flipped West Palm, Miami-Dade, nearly flipped Duval, and a few others. So, and I think either both Hillsborough and not Orange, but Seminole. I think it's Seminole. All those. This is as of 3 days ago, or as of Sunday morning. Sorry. So Florida, I've had Florida solid red all summer long. I've had North Carolina has been the one I've worried about because I don't know North Carolina very well, and I know that there's a significant, there's been a significant push to change that state. Ohio is not a battleground state. Ohio is going to go solid Trump. I fully expect to see Michigan and Minnesota and all go Trump. I think he's going to win with 320, Patrick. I've been saying this all summer. Like, I can do you the electoral college map. But North Carolina is the one that I have been worried about. And if he can't win Pennsylvania, then that map to 320, if he loses North Carolina, becomes very hinky. Because Trump doesn't need to win 270. I think he needs to win 295 or higher. He needs to win 270 that cannot be contested in the courts. Right. So where it doesn't matter. Well, Pennsylvania's under, they got Pennsylvania and Michigan, but he's still got 271. Who cares? But he picked up Nevada and won Arizona and picked up a couple in like New Hampshire and Maine or whatever, and he was at 271, 272, even without those states where they know they're going to contest the vote. That's what I'm worried about. I want to see that happen conclusively on November 3rd, because anything less than that is going to be a shooting war, and that's my take at this point. And I'm still not convinced that they're going to concede, even if that's the case, because then they'll just lean on the electors to be
Yeah.
faithless electors, and try and sabotage everything at the electoral college. Because
Yes.
you live in the UK, right? You know what it's like, and you've been living there during this entire Brexit thing. I want to shift a little bit to Brexit, because I want you to talk about, because I think we're about to go through the exact same thing as what happens when we vote wrong a second time in a row here in the United States. We voted wrong in 2016, just like y'all voted wrong in Brexit in 2016. So the UK got it right in 2019, mostly. Yeah, Boris Johnson is PM, and you're gonna add color to that may not be sanguine. But the history of the EU. When people vote wrong, they're forced to vote again and
Yes.
again and again. So take it away.
You're right to point that out. I mean, certainly that's the case with Ireland, and I don't even think Portugal got a chance to vote.
Yes.
I'm not sure.
No, Germany never did.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, it's amazing that they even had that referendum. There's a lot of speculation as to what was really going on in the man's cigar library that made the decision to call that referendum, because there wasn't really a lot of public pressure to have it. David Cameron did it. Now, the clues are, the devil's in the detail with that, because on the same day that David Cameron called the referendum, I believe it was February of 2016, he called the referendum, and he also at the same day released a white paper. And of course, this is totally ignored by the mainstream media, but it's absolutely pivotal if you want to know the whole story. The paper was called The Best of Both Worlds. And David Cameron had just done a whistle-stop European tour, meeting all the different governments of the EU, and was renegotiating Britain's relationship with the EU to opt into the things that Britain wanted to opt into, and to get closer to the EU in that sense, and then to opt out or to get distance on the things that he or his government or whoever he's representing felt that didn't work for Britain. And so there's a lot of mystery as to why that happened. There wasn't a public strike. There weren't people demanding.
Right.
Some people, the theory is that he wanted to do the vote, let the referendum happen, because he was sure that the public would basically choose the EU to remain, and then that would basically close the issue forever, basically. And from there, head down, going deep into a federal superstate. So, but then looking at the COVID situation, I don't mean to sound like a completely crazy conspiracy theorist here, but all of this sort of panic emergency scenarios that were being tabled in preparation for Brexit, a lot of the fear mongering, Project Fear, that we had over here, and food shortages and supply chain breaking and all this stuff, it was all for nothing, because there was already a 2 to 3 year transition period baked in anyway after the date of supposed leaving.
Right.
So you just basically stay into status quo European agreements until such a time you had 2 or 3 years of transition to negotiate. It's not a big deal, not an impossibility. But then looking at the COVID situation and looking at what the country, it's a fundamental revolution that has happened, where withdrawn democracy completely, no more parliamentary democracy, some of the most authoritarian legislation in the history of the country, and no debate on it, no opposition. Labor Party just folded completely, like a cheap deck chair, one of those deck chairs you bring to a football tailgating game.
Yep.
Really cheap. And the Labor's just basically Keir Starmer, the Labor leader, who's a Tony Blair disciple. He's just a whip for Boris Johnson on that side. So I'm looking at that, and I thought, wow, Brexit was Brexit to prepare for COVID, because I'm looking at the fundamental changes, and the Brexit issue is symbolically, yes, in terms of what it means for sovereignty or reasserting the nation state. But then I'm looking at the actual nuts and bolts of the situation, and right now we're in the fundamental, revolution globally that's bigger. So is a question of Britain preparing itself to extricating itself from Europe in advance of what we're seeing now. And Britain's a very canny nation. It certainly didn't run the whole world for as long as it did without being canny, without setting the agenda, without being ahead, and without manipulating and sabotaging everybody else's institutions. So, I mean, I really wonder, looking at what's transpired over the last 8 months and the amount of quantitative easing, just printing money, the amount of debt, the fracturing of societies, the destruction of so many industries, and then the World Economic Forum agenda being rolled in as the new normal in preparation for a fourth industrial revolution, or whatever the master plan is from Herr Schwab.
Yes, Herr Schwab.
Yeah, in Geneva. So, I don't know. I'm not convinced that Brexit isn't tied to the new normal in some way. I know in the trade sense, yes, it could be very much so. Britain renegotiating all of its trade deals, becoming airstrip one for the United States between the U.S. and Europe, to borrow an Orwellian term. That's really what Britain would become if on paper, if what's being pushed right now. I mean, you have to remember the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the TTIP, that those were sort of shelved after a whole lot of work to push them and get them into position. All of a sudden, they were abandoned at the last minute without too much of a fight. Yeah,
but they had to be, because Trump said no. None of this works without the United States.
Yeah.
I mean, and this is the problem. And I think that this is why the read on Boris Johnson has been so very, very difficult. I've been, I spent a lot of time trying to cover Brexit and trying to figure out what's happening here. And, before we started recording, you gave me some interesting thoughts to think about vis-a-vis Johnson. I've been running with the theory that everybody's waiting to see what happens with this election, that this election is like a singularity. Like the whole of geopolitics and the whole of global politics is coming down to what American voters do on November 3rd, roughly. And because all of these narratives of the last 6, 7, 8 years are all coming down to this point. And that after this happens, then we'll have some closures of what we know is going to happen next. Because it really is truly Robert Frost's, two paths diverged in the woods. And because for all of his faults, and Donald Trump has a myriad of them, right? But Trump understands his role, and he understands what the problem is, and he knows now that the problem is 10 times worse than he ever expected when he walked into the White House the first time. And he said this multiple times. He just said it recently, and it says it's time to get rid of these people. And I think that actually Trump today is less of a globalist, for lack of a better term, or less sympathetic to these people than he was when he walked into the White House in 2016. I think today he's actually a man on a mission. I see something different than I saw 4 years ago. Okay.
Yeah.
Or even 6 months ago. I think COVID changed him. And I think Boris Johnson is an interesting character because he can jump either way. And now your thoughts on Brexit are great, right? Like that. The idea that Brexit would be setting the stage for what.
So you're walking along and suddenly it hits you. You've lost your keys. A few seconds of panic, but then you find them in your coat, where you put them. Phew. Now that feels like winning. So roll with it and turn today into Wednesday with a scratch card. Make today a Wednesday with a scratch card from the National Lottery. Your numbers make amazing happen. Search Dream Big, Play Small. Rules and procedures apply. Players must be 16 or over.
Herr Schwab has got a plan for us, but I don't know. So go ahead and I want you to add some color onto what you just said there as to why you think that about Johnson. I think that would be important.
Yeah, well, I mean, Boris Johnson's image is, and he is intellectually brilliant in the sense of he speaks many languages. He can, recite Antigone probably by heart in Greek. and act out all the parts as well, and just keep hold a room doing that.
Right.
He is brilliant in that sense, but he has massive shortcomings in terms of his interpersonal skills. He's almost on the spectrum in that sense. I mean, he's just a real hard-headed, aloof a lot of the times. And so I mean, he markets himself as the bumbling conservative. But if you look at the way what this Tory government has done in the last 8 years, I mean, they have gone. I don't see there's nothing conservative in any of the policies or actions that they've done. They have taken rights and liberties. I mean, it's social engineering writ large. So, government telling you what you can buy, what businesses can stay open, what's essential and non-essential. This week they've put tarps over greeting cards in supermarkets in Wales because greeting cards and magazines are deemed to be non-essential items. So they've started that whole song and dance in the last week. And who can stay open, which industries are winners, which are losers, which are going to get state aid, which aren't. Having the state run payroll for private businesses because of the quote pandemic. I mean, this is communism. This is communist, fascist.
This is Britain. This is Britain in the 1950s.
It's way. They didn't do that in the 1950s.
Ah,
so they're increasing the national debt. They're damaging people's livelihoods. They're putting whole sectors out of business just by this policy, based on a threat that can't be substantiated at all. And we talked about that a long time ago, and nothing's changed on my viewpoint since we last talked back in April. So then I'm scratching my head saying, who is Boris Johnson? And it's Peter Hitchens that said, who I have a tremendous amount of respect for, who's a great historian, who's a great journalist. And he said that there's no conservatives left in the Tory party. They're a bunch of raving Trotskyites. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. It's only conservative on the surface.
Yes.
There is no conservative movement in Britain, not like in the U.S., of course. You have a genuine conservative ideology, and you have genuine conservatives, and you have libertarians and people that are actively promoting their beliefs and trying to see that realized in policy. You have that in America. Still you have it. I know it's definitely on the ropes.
It's weak, but it's
yes, but it's there. It's there. So then I looked at Boris Johnson's background, and his father, Stanley Johnson, is a fervent population reductionist. So he, in the same vein that Bill Gates' father is also a Malthusian.
Right.
And believes that that's the most important issue really is overpopulation. And so if you look at Boris Johnson's close relationship with Bill Gates, and Gates' extremely intimate relationship with the British government, the Wellcome Trust, Imperial College, Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance. I mean, Britain's biggest contributor there, behind maybe one other donor, I'm not sure. And so I look at that, and I see a pattern, and the pattern in Boris Johnson's Build Back Better, World Economic Forum agenda.
Yes.
And I thought, there's nothing conservative there. I mean, he can't be any more diametrically opposed to Donald Trump in that respect. And so then I'm thinking, Boris would not be prime minister, and back to Brexit, Tom, Brexit. Boris would not be prime minister without Brexit. Jeremy Corbyn, even with the anti-Semitism smear campaign, that phony smear campaign that they threw at poor Corbyn, he would have beaten Johnson, even with that, even with all the deep state smear campaigns about him being aligned with Al Qaeda and all this. So he got the full nonsense. Trump treatment. But on the left, Boris only won the Labour heartland seats in the north and places like that. Without Brexit, because of Brexit split the Labour vote. The Blairites came in, convinced Corbyn to back off of his pledge to stand by the will of the people and respect the referendum on a second referendum.
Yes.
And so Boris Johnson won the day based on Brexit. So then I'm thinking, if there was no Brexit, Boris wouldn't have been prime minister. And I don't think he comes in with a massive mandate, huge landslide mandate, and then he's able to do the COVID agenda like nobody else could, because he has the command of half of the working class, the equivalent of the Reagan Democrats.
Right.
Here in the UK. He's got the command of the Tory party. And before, people didn't even know what was going on. It just happened. Lockdown happened, and we're in this quasi bizarre, world, dystopic world. All of a sudden, 6 months in, we're like, I thought this was only going to be for 3 weeks.
Right.
And
now,
so
it
made me reevaluate the whole story, Tom. I mean, I just started thinking.
Oh yeah, no, it's a fascinating take on it, Patrick, and it's causing me to do a lot of on-the-fly reassessment of things as well. I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate here. I'm going to throw out that Johnson did at the beginning want to go for a herd immunity strategy, and then he was roundly beaten down, right, by everyone. Now, whether he did that, again, how far does the rabbit hole go? Did he say that in order to elicit opprobrium from everyone so that he would lose some Tory voters and bring the polls closer to allow Labor back into the race? I sometimes I just think it's just not that complicated. These people aren't that sophisticated, right? Now they may be, and I'm happy to entertain those notions. But I think that I think that I don't trust Johnson at all, as you have pointed out, and for very good reasons. What I'll say is this: Johnson also knows that he has to get Brexit done properly, and Brexit has to be a real thing, or there's going to be a real political revolution in the UK that is not acceptable to the ruling class. So, and Johnson is the guy who can deliver that. There's going to be I've been operating under the theory, and it's not a thesis, or maybe it's a thesis, but certainly not a theorem, that Johnson is going along with these lockdowns and all of this stuff because there's a real possibility of yet another coup attempt against him. Because as we were doing all this color revolution stuff here in the United States, in Minneapolis, and they were going to put a 50-day siege on the White House leading up to the election, and all of this stuff, and how they were going to, all this. This is classic color revolutionary stuff, which they're also going to try to pull after the election.
Yes.
If it's close. You guys ran through the same thing in Britain. I saw statues being dropped left and right. I saw all sorts of crazy stuff, in London. Right. To me, between that and getting rid of Mark Sedwill as chief cabinet secretary and national security director, he held three very important hats. Johnson got rid of him on June 28th, 2 days before the extension deadline. Dominic Cummings had to come back from lockdown, or from hibernation, whatever that word is, quarantine. That's the word I'm looking for. Had to come back from quarantine and stop Sedwill from signing off on a Brexit extension or a trade talks extension bill without him while Johnson was in the hospital. I mean, that happened. So I think Johnson's actually trying to wheedle exactly what you're talking about. I think he's on board with the Great Reset. But I don't think he wants to be part of the Great Reset and be part of the EU as well. That there's an opportunity for the UK to reestablish itself as a dominant player over Germany.
Yes.
Because Germany actually is the country to me that looks like it's on the chopping block at this point, because the French and the Brits together are actually putting all the pressure on Germany along with Donald Trump, while at the same time the Davos crowd, the World Economic Forum, is trying to destroy the United States. And then roll all that political capital into the European, the new Borg cube, which is the European Union, or the EU-SSR. That's the way I see the whole thing, like kind of laying out. But I don't trust Johnson at all that he's not on board with all this stuff, because it's pretty obvious. But he has to have a kind of like the lockdown twofer. First, he stops the color revolution between now and January 1st, and then when they have to go to negative interest rates and cancel the physical pound and all the other things that they may have to do, because everybody's broke, Patrick. Like all the countries are broke. The only one that can survive this without going to some kind of central bank digital currency and the repudiation of debt and all the rest of it. This is the United States because we're still the world's reserve currency. But all of Europe and probably the UK and others are all going to have to, they're all going to change everything over, and the social unrest is going to be biblical. And they're scared to death of it.
Yeah,
That's
the first thing I'll point out about Boris as well is he was a Europhile. Mm-hmm. He was a Europhile up until April before the referendum. Okay,
right.
He was pro-Europe. Look at his record as mayor of London.
Yeah.
So he became Mr. Brexit. I think the people I was talking to told me that he was approached by the consortium or a consortium to basically to adopt a Brexiteer position and to ride that, and they said that you can ride this into power, and so he did.
Yeah.
And Theresa May was also a Europhile. I mean, the whole of the Tories were, and David Cameron was.
Oh yeah,
they're all Europhiles. So I don't buy this Boris being Mr. Brexit based on that. We thought it was a psyop. That's what myself and the colleagues said at the time, and then it just became a reality.
Right.
It became a reality. So Boris's Green New Deal as well. I mean, that is just
it's insane.
Unholy. That's an unholy distance from anything conservative. So it's a mixed. It could be a mixed bag, as you say, Tom. Where he is on board with the World Economic Forum's new normal future, fourth industrial. I mean, he said that Britain will become a green energy it'll be the Saudi Arabia of wind, which is just a ridiculous statement. I can't believe he said it because the only reason Saudi ships its oil around the world, you can't ship wind energy anywhere. You can't even get it to the nearest city. So
the whole thing is that the whole green energy thing is going to collapse so badly.
Yeah,
it's really quite sad. We're dealing with an energy density problem that look, Herr Schwab is he's a communist.
Yeah,
and they finally came out of their shell and said, by 2030 you'll own nothing and love it. I mean,
you'll own nothing. You'll own nothing. You'll rent everything, but someone will own it.
Yeah, someone's going to own
you.
it. Yeah, it won't be you. You'll own it. Well, we're already in that state now. No, we don't own anything now as it is. I mean, look, radical libertarian here, dude. We have property taxes. I'm sorry, but I have to pay rent to my government every year. Excuse me. I mean, I'm I pull off my astute political analyst hat and put on my flower throwing libertarian hat and go, look, I have to I owe taxes on I pay rent to the landowner who's the actual landowner is the government. Excuse me, I'm not free. Okay.
That's right.
Fundamentally, but let's not, but let's I'll have that podcast on a different day with a different time. But this is, never forget that. We're not free. We're just various levels of free. I still have guns though, so when they show up, there might be a fight. But they're going to bring more guns than I have, so whatever.
If the Schwab agenda is a global communism, an oligarchical enforced communism where you have the elite Bezos and these super industrialists that own everything and we're all rentiers on the digital plantation.
Right.
If that happens, definitely Europe is already halfway towards that model.
Oh yeah,
with a little bit of resistance, but not much.
Nope.
The only countries, I mean, the U.S. would definitely resist it. But it would, tear itself to pieces in the next 20 or 30 years with the toxic politics that are being injected into schools and the radical, crazy leftist agenda, social justice, social engineering agenda that's just completely mad. But on the fringes, you'll have some of these, economies and societies that won't make any sense for them, and they'll absolutely eschew that. So you have this elite socialist utopia, supposedly in Europe, Canada, and a couple of other places, and then transition zones, and the U.S. kind of in flux with the political battle going on inside. I mean, the
U.S. is not going to survive that.
The Republic, the Republic might not survive. The U.S. would still survive, but the Republic wouldn't. So,
Florida will break away from any of this rotten nonsense. I'm telling you, Florida is in a position that they can do it, and they can lead the South away from all this nonsense again. And it literally is one of the strongest states in the union, and it's rapidly going to replace California in that respect. We have a state budget where we owe $1,800 per person. That's it. That's all the state of Florida owes. We could literally issue our own currency tomorrow.
You should.
I flex it, baby. We've been talking about it I've been talking about it with my people for months now. I'm like, Florida is in such a strong fiscal position. We generate our own energy. We're an energy exporter in terms of electricity. We have agriculture. We have everything we need.
Who has a state-owned bank? Is it South Dakota or North Dakota?
I think it's South Dakota, but I don't remember.
Florida's
not in a position to do this yet, but they could create those institutions very, very quickly. And the amount of real money that exists in South Florida, have you seen the amount of money? I've seen the amount of money that's in South Florida. I went to the first Trump flotilla in June, right? And I'm looking at $500 million worth of deployed capital, flying 20 no more bullshit flags. Like, I got news for you. And that was the people they could get out on a random Sunday in June. Like, it's crazy how, there's just crazy. Florida is a different world. It's also like 3 different states, but that's its own discussion. But I just don't see the United States surviving this politically.
Yeah. So now we're talking about geopolitics here. We're talking about nation states. We're talking about geographical borders and regions. And if the U.S. Politics could break the U.S. and in a different way than what Britain is in situation Britain's in with Brexit. In the U.S., the left would expand into a bigger federal global system, a global government system, or a new North American Union or something like that. That would appeal to the globalist sensibilities on the left, as that would be the kind of apex of their political economy. With Brexit, what you have to understand is if Brexit happens, Brexit could very easily, and this is just geopolitical reality, Brexit could very easily trigger the breakaway of Scotland. And Scotland would definitely be running to Brussels, 100% as it stands now. And then the unification of Ireland, because the Good Friday Agreement and the border between Northern and Southern Ireland and it being a porous border and free travel and all of these things that are guaranteed within the Good Friday Agreement. Right. In reality, and a lot of people won't agree with me on this, but one of the negotiators for that from the EU side on the negotiations from the EU side is Michel Barnier, who's also been the Brexit negotiator with Britain this time around. And it was because of the EU superstructure, the umbrella, that agreement to make peace between the North and South was really able to happen from a practical point of view. And it was an extra cloak that helped to kind of secure that agreement. When you take that cloak away, all of a sudden now you have a problem with do we have a hard border? Is the border going to be down the Irish Sea? Is Northern Ireland going to normalize its customs and VAT with the EU, which is the Republic? And the EU have won the war, at least for now, of the hearts and the minds of the people in the Republic of Ireland, in terms of where their political sensibilities and values are, and they're definitely with that kind of woke EU globalist, because it allows small countries. This is the allure of the EU. It allows the small countries to punch above their weight, to be included in something bigger than their country. And Ireland was struggling. It was close to being a third world country. In the 70s and 80s, really economically, really deprived. Right. And And EU came subsidies, ag subsidies. It's all the farmers in the heartlands that were struggling to survive, and they were able to kind of get subsidies from the EU and exist, and whole communities were saved by that. So the breakup of the UK is imminent with Brexit. It's almost a fait accompli. It seems like it anyway. So this is a trend that can't be reversed.
I don't know. I don't know about that. I was chatting with Alexander Mercouris of the Duran about this a couple weeks ago, and we've talked about this. I'm just going to again. I hear all of that, but I also think that when Boris sat down with and put down the internal markets bill and told the EU to go scratch, that was the moment where he said, "Look, we're not going to be the ones that put a hard border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. If that's going to happen, it's going to be you guys doing it." Okay, because it doesn't need to happen. The EU is trying to make the Brits do it because Theresa May negotiated that away. She took that on because she didn't want Brexit to happen.
But there's another X factor in that there is a desire in the North and the South, especially with this young generation, to unify.
I agree.
And it's going to happen in 20. It's going to become an issue in 20 years or less.
Here's the gig. It's going to happen regardless of whether Brexit occurs or not. And the United Kingdom, like the United States and like the European Union and like all major confederations of disparate groups of people, as libertarians, we should be like cheering this because more countries equals better. Period.
But it means that they're going into the EU. Northern Ireland goes into the EU effectively.
If the EU survives the next 20-year process, I think
if it does, yes. Sure. But who is at the center? Who's the most powerful country economically and politically in the European Union? It's
Germany.
It's Germany. And what has been Germany's goal and what's been Britain's goal over the last 150 years is basically to subdue each other in different ways. And this would be the ultimate victory if somehow the European Union, which is a German-dominated institution, was able to break up the United Kingdom.
Sure.
Indirectly.
Yeah. They're trying to do the same thing with Italy. They've already subjugated Greece. Italy is, for all intents and purposes, German-occupied territory with Conte as PM. But I think at the same time, I think that once Britain gets out of this and they survive, and I don't think the Scots will break away because the Scottish economic system is still completely tied to the UK. It's not tied to the EU. Nicola Sturgeon, I think, is smoking something really good if she thinks that she can lead against a strong government in Westminster. So that she can continue to lead another Scottish independence movement. She's already lost one vote. I think that the Scots would like their independence, but they don't necessarily want what the SNP is selling. I think the SNP are the best game in town for getting independence, but I think Sturgeon and Ian Blackford are in a very difficult position when, if they were to actually get their referendum, then they would all get voted out of office, and the Scots would just declare independence and say no to the EU. Because it's the SNP that wants to be in the EU. It is not the Scottish people necessarily. They're still angry with the Brits. I mean, it's still two fingers up, and
Well, it comes down to money at the end of the day as well.
Right.
And Brussels isn't stupid. You know what they've done in Cornwall and places which is just across the bay from me. They pumped a lot of money into different programs, regeneration, roads, grant money, and so. They did this in Wales. They did this in Cornwall. They did this all over the country, Northern Ireland, Scotland. So the EU is very strategic also in that sense because what they're doing is buying patronage.
Yes.
Over the years.
Oh, absolutely.
And so that Ireland will never revolt, not anytime soon, because the EU bought the heartlands. They bought the family farms, the small to medium-sized agricultural holdings, and bought them through subsidies through the 80s. And 90s, and so they have an absolute loyalty to the gold stars on the blue flag.
Absolutely. For 2 generations minimum. Agreed. No argument. I don't think the UK, as it stands, I think Brexit is the moment. I actually think that Brexit is the only way to stop the UK from being broken up right now, because Johnson did make a very strong statement with the internal markets bill, and Macron would have never signed off on. This is my thing. I firmly think that Macron is pushing to put France in charge of the EU and to destroy what's left of Germany. I think he sees Brexit as an opportunity to bring the Germans down low and to destroy their export business. And I think they're about there. And the Russians just told them. I wrote an article about this the other day. The Russians just told the Germans to go scratch. Now you got France like stabbing them in the back over Brexit. You've got and the U.S. Trump has done nothing but antagonize Angela Merkel.
Germany is a kept woman, because they're occupied by the U.S. militarily.
Yep.
The CIA are all over every German newspaper, Der Spiegel, Deutsche Welt, the other one I can't remember. I mean, it's a known fact.
FAZ.
Yeah, it's in Zoichon. I forget. I can't pronounce it.
FAZ. I can't pronounce it. I just know FAZ is one of the major.
So Germany is a kept. So they're completely ridiculous in their position with Russia because they'll put a brakes on the Nord Stream 2 thing because of some phony Novichok plot with Navalny.
Right.
It's just ridiculous how they would fall for that. So the U.S. is very active in the games in Germany still.
And Merkel has always thought that she could play all the great powers off of each other while constantly wheedling Germany into the right position, and then betray them at the last minute every time for the EU, which is exactly what she's done. Yeah. And that game, Trump doesn't play that game with her. He doesn't, because she doesn't know how to play that game because Trump won't play it with her. Whereas.
Yeah, Germany stands to benefit more than any other country from the Chinese Belt and Road initiative. If that's realized, Germany would be a massive beneficiary because Germany still has incredible capabilities and innovation, engineering, industry. I mean, they can systemize anything. As history has taught us, they can systemize anything and excel at it. And so they have something China needs, and so they'll those overland trade routes and everything. Germany's going to benefit massively from that, and so is all the countries in their immediate sphere, including Russia. Russia.
I agree, and at the same time, the Russians have the ultimate hammer, which is that they can do the same thing. By the way, because they did it really well, and they did it under communism. Okay. They made communism work for 75 years, and they now have they have leadership and potential industrial capacity, and they have their mathematicians are just as good, and their scientists are just as good. Yada yada yada. I see the opportunity here that Russia could easily supplant Germany in that respect. Not saying that Putin doesn't believe this. Putin came out the other day and said that Germany is one of the potential great powers of the 21st century. Okay, he said that about Baldai the other day. I found that interesting. At the same time, while Sergei Lavrov, his foreign minister, was saying we're not talking to the Germans anymore because they're terrible, because of how they've treated us over everything over the last. So there's a lot of doublespeak coming out of the Russians right now. But Belt and Road doesn't get built without the Russians, and it doesn't get built without Iran. So it's just Merkel is going to be off the stage in a year, and whoever comes in next, and everybody that's going to come next within the CDU, within her Christian Democratic Union Party, to me, they all look like they're kept, bought, and paid for by the United States. But that same United States deep state, I don't know that if Trump wins this election, that it'll be as strong, and that this may just all be running out the clock, waiting for things to change. I know Merkel is desperate to hope that Biden wins, because then we can have a restoration of the TTIP and the TPP and all the rest of it, and the Paris Accords and all the rest of it. We can get back on track, right? But under Trump,
Merkel is, what's her ideology? She's definitely a socialist.
She's East German,
obviously with the caveat of liking Germany in the catbird seat, of course.
Right.
That's going to be the natural German position, but she's on board with they shut down all their nuclear power plants.
I know.
That's just insane.
I know. If you want to talk about the Green New Deal, like nuclear power is the way look, this is why I know these people are unserious, because the only way for them to usher in the world that they want is nuclear power. It's not wind and solar. It is, but you see, nuclear power would actually allow the proletariat to be stable, and the bourgeoisie to be stable. And the last thing you actually want when you're a Trotskyite and a permanent revolutionary is for the bourgeoisie to get comfortable at all. You want them constantly sliding towards proletarian so that you can then act at a moment's notice to go overthrow whoever you want. Like, that's the last thing they want. They want neo-feudalism. They call it communism, but they want neo-feudalism, where they're on charge up top and everybody else works for them. And these people this is all Venus Project stuff. If you've ever looked up that thing, that's who these people are. We don't need money. We don't need any of this. We don't need any of that stuff. We don't need scarcity.
Jacques Fresco.
Oh, yes. God, it's all this Venus Project stuff. These people are insane. And I could start going to like Jungian archetypes about this, but I won't. But it's very, very much, a kind of anima possession thing. These people are nuts.
If that's the case, if that's what would likely happen in Europe first, okay,
right,
maybe Canada. The United States, there's not a whole lot of chance of that happening in the U.S. for a while. So the U.S. would be one of the last, really powerful capitalist countries with, some socialized aspects to it.
I like to think of us that we're just the fascists that refuse to be communist. We're really more fascist than we are communist, than we are capitalist. We really do have a command and control economy. And by the time we're done here, we're going to have a command and control economy. The Fed's going to own everything. They're going to own all the stocks. It's going to be the same thing. They're just going to do it differently. But the difference is that they didn't disarm us.
Yeah.
And we have 30 million newly minted gun owners in the United States this year.
Yeah. My biggest fear about the U.S., even though the liberties or rights are explicitly taken away, they've been voluntarily given away.
Yes.
Through brainwashing and an absolutely coordinated, incredibly impressive machine of propaganda.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing that worries me, is how easy that was done in the last 8 months. And that a lot of people look to the U.S. for leadership that sense. The world looks, even people that are in destitute, dysfunctional, quasi-socialized, neoliberal hellholes, they look to the U.S. as at least a beacon. At least if the U.S. can maintain some independence and survive and have a constitution and a Bill of Rights and people have liberties, then there's a chance that it could happen in other countries. I'm putting aside all the U.S. imperialist antics, by the way, when I make this argument. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, this is what the U.S. can aspire to, not what it is.
Exactly. So that worries me tremendously. What I've seen in the last 8 months, how in the last 4 years, how easy it's been to flip people to through peer pressure, through social desirability factors, to get them to believe total fantasies and outright fiction. And then I saw Obama is stumping right now for Joe Biden, and he gave a speech to a parking lot full of cars, which is another laugh. But and they're all honking. He gave a speech and he said that Donald Trump won't even release relief for the Americans that need it, and the mother and her 2 kids and blah blah. He gave the whole song and dance, and Nancy Pelosi's been sitting on the bill. So I'm against the bill, by the way. I'm against the stimulus, but it's so disingenuous to lie to the American people about something that's so obviously a provable falsehood. Obama did that for years as president.
Oh yeah.
And people love being lied to, and this is the Americans now.
Yeah, no, you're right, but at the same time, what's really interesting, and I've noticed a very interesting trend here. This is, I'll give you, I'm going to 2 more things to throw at you. One of which has to do with Boris Johnson, and the other thing has to do with the United States. That may make you feel a little bit better, right? Because I know, I hear what you're saying, and believe me, I share 75 to 80, and on some days 90% of your anxiety about this. 2 things. One, what's up with Boris Johnson trying to do away with the BBC tax and to actually put, this is one thing, because the BBC is arguably the most powerful bastion of global communist thought that there is. The BBC is truly the epicenter of British communism, which is, in my mind, the most virulent form of the stuff, by the way. And then the second thing to understand is that here in the U.S., we have all these kids who used to go to school. Now we're sitting at home in front of a Zoom connection, trying to figure out how to get educated. And they weren't really getting educated before, but you have all these parents in lockdown standing over their kids' shoulders going, what are you learning? And how many of them are in private schools now? And how many of them left the public school system? We can see I did an entire issue of my newsletter based around the idea that we've had a fundamental shift here, and one of the unintended consequences of COVID and their great bringing low of the bourgeoisie down to the level of the proletariat is that, well, we also have access to too much information, and now we can see them for who they are. And we're really seeing the code, because all of a sudden people weren't working 14 hours a day on the hamster wheel. They're unemployed.
Yeah.
They're on public assistance. They're on this, they're on that. They're like, this is all wrong. I'm not sending my kid to the school anymore. I'll give you a perfect example. My child would not go back to the private school she was going to, which catered to kids on the spectrum. My daughter is autistic, mildly autistic, and she has scholarships to send her to private school here locally, because they were going to do the whole social distancing thing and masks and all the rest of it. She's like, no. And it became obvious to her that she was not happy with the chaotic environment engendered by, for lack of a better term, the shitlibs that ran the school. They were well-intentioned people, but they were shitlibs. Mm-hmm. I now have her in a Christian school, non-denominational Christian school, in the town north of me, in the city north of me, in Lake City, and she couldn't be happier. Now we're in a religious household. We're not a spiritual, but we're in a religious household, and I'm sending my daughter to a Christian school, and she's thriving from the structure, from the positive energy, from the fact that the school refuses categorically to deal with any of this lockdown stuff or the COVID stuff at all. That they run everything as if nothing's changed, and everybody's happier. And there's millions of people, I would argue, at least a few million people in the United States that are going through that same experience now, and that's the seeds of what comes next. You have to think of the United States as really close to, we're right around 1988 in the Soviet Union. Mm-hmm. And then once it breaks, then we're going to go through the 12 to 10 years worth of uncertainty and warlordism. That's going to happen. And then we'll be able to move on. They're going to break us, Patrick. I hate to tell you this, but at least we're going to hit the peak break period here now, not 20 years from now. Because if it's 20 years from now, oh my God, dude, who wants to live through that? I think we're really close to the whole breakdown point here. And I think that why I'm hoping for a major Trump win is that we can break these people psychologically. And no, really, we don't like you. And we don't agree with you. And you're not the majority of people in this country. Okay? You've been fed a lie, and that lie is now made manifest. And I think, like it or not, what the British people told Boris Johnson in December was exactly that. You don't hand even this guy, who absolutely is a traitor in many ways, you don't hand him an 83-seat majority and say, and then betray us. You have to get this done. And if you don't get it done, we'll string you up by your toenails too, because we can recall you just as fast as we can recall anybody else. And so he's walking a very fine line here. So we'll see what happens.
Well, on the first point, with regards to the BBC, the television license, which is, you rightly call it a tax, basically, it's a tax to have a TV in your house and watch BBC programming. So, you're paying $160, $170, or $80 a year for programming that you don't like or don't watch. Right. And you still have to pay it under threat of fine, or it used to be threat of imprisonment. I don't know how many people are actually sentenced for that. Right. But it's funny because the BBC, they ran some incredible fake news on behalf of Boris and did all sorts of. They set him up actually for his candidacy, Laura Kutzenberg at the BBC, and they've been kind of protecting Boris and the Tory government ever since, especially over COVID. So it's an interesting dynamic there. I think the writing was on the wall long before this, that the BBC's television license model was really past its sell-by date, and they're just kind of hanging on for dear life. It's a giant, gargantuan institution with all sorts of entitled employees, and it's one of those jobs for life. If you get into the BBC and you can get that pension, you're set. You don't have to, which is why it's such a staid and boring institution. It does such banal programming because that's the culture. It's just basically all about security. So it's a great propaganda machine. And it might just get broken up and sold off into little parts, and that might be on the cards. I mean, I don't see a lot of people that are probably going to protest about it. There'll be remnants of it that'll be preserved. Certainly, there's some good programming that they do that appeals to a lot of people, and that might get preserved. And maybe it'll just get whittled down. But it's also got a big commercial arm, BBC, right. And it sells, and it has a profit-making ventures and arms internationally as well. And also there's BBC Media Action, which trains journalists. So that's a subterfuge operation that runs alongside the Foreign Office and British intelligence, and they destabilize Syria and countries like this by training journalists, to be opposition journalists in these countries. And they use that's on record, by the way. Oh yeah. They were active in Syria before the crisis. And they had so BBC, it's just a Trojan horse in that respect. But so I don't know quite what to make of if Boris is just reading the tea leaves on that and it's kind of going with the flow anyway, because most people hate the BBC. It's a damaged brand nationally, and Jimmy Savile had a lot to do with that. But in terms of the U.S. and Zoom and that transition. That new normal transition, and as you rightly commented, some good can come out of the situation where you realize, what a cesspool some of the public schools have become, just totally dependent and, under the mercy of the thumb of the teachers' unions in a lot of states. And so, yeah, that's a real thing. And I think, I think it's good to be in it can be good for a lot of people. Certainly, if that's what you want from society, is to create leaders who can maneuver through groups and hierarchies and to achieve things and to become sophisticated social and political citizens. Most likely, they're going to get a lot of that skill set through schools and things like that through their formal education. So it is really valuable in that respect. For other people, maybe not so much at all. So it depends. But the atomization, there is a trend towards the atomization of society, to the atomization of communities, the atomization of Western civilization, to kind of whittle people down into compartments. And that's my fear with the Zoom revolution, is if it's not accompanied by an extension in liberty in other areas, then it can be potentially, devastating for a lot of people socially, and in terms of, camaraderie, team building. I think about how wonderful sports is for kids growing up, and all these great activities that you do, and you make great relationships, and you have these wonderful memories, and that's such a great part, I think, of a lot of kids' childhoods and lives. And so a lot of that's kind of gone to the wall in the last year. And
that's
child
abuse. It's child
what's
abuse.
That?
It's child abuse. What they're doing to these kids.
I think so.
It's absolutely awful. My daughter's she's 14, so she was absolutely miserable all last year. She couldn't see her friends. She would just break out crying on a regular basis. She just couldn't, and it's terrible what they're doing to it. And you're absolutely right that they've destroyed sports. Well, they want to destroy everything. These are commies. There's nothing they can't find that they can't destroy in their quest to build the new Soviet man. And the problem with all that is that it's anti-human nature. You can beat people only for so long, and then eventually you beat the wrong people long enough, and they stand up to you, and you go, "I'm sorry, but that's enough." And then things get ugly.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I hate to say this. This is not a call to violence or anything. It's never that. Absolutely not. But they're going to leave us with no other options. So this election is the last time we have the opportunity, very clear. I want to bring this right back to the election, because the election is the singularity as we finish up here, that this election is that last opportunity for us to say, look, enough is enough. I don't care what your dad taught you. I don't care what you lived through in the horrors of World War II. We don't want what you're selling. That's enough. Stop it, or there's going to be real consequences. Because I'm reminded of the classic definition of the word meek, which is not peace at any price. It is a man who has weapons and knows when to keep them sheathed and when to take them out. That is what Christ meant when he said, the meek shall inherit the earth. Now, that's been propagandized by the power brokers for the last 2,000 years into, oh no, submit. Oh, no. Render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. Parse those words very carefully. Again, it's like, that's what I think this election is about. I thought that last year with the British election as well. That, and the British people delivered a result that was unequivocal. If you beat us any harder, we're coming after you. You do what we told you to do. And if you don't do it, okay? So now, that said.
So, you're walking along and suddenly it hits you. You've lost your keys. A few seconds of panic, but then you find them. In your coat, where you put them. Phew. Now that feels like winning. So roll with it and turn today into Wednesday with a scratch card. Make today a Wednesday with a scratch card from the National Lottery. Your numbers make amazing happen. Search Dream Big, Play Small. Rules and procedures apply. Players must be 16 or over.
Does Trump win? In your opinion?
Well, how I see the election playing out is based, again, back to the election, based on the Electoral College and the state-by-state analysis. As of Saturday, we did a calculation. It was 306 to 232. So Trump would win with 306 electoral votes. If that holds, or it's a 320 like you're talking about, and there's a sufficient margin there to ward off the lawfare coup that's coming. I'm sad to say this, but the lawfare coup is coming no matter what the margin is. And they will hold up the final calling of states. So you have a situation where the White House will call it, and then the media will go with the institutions, with the deep state, with the DNC, and they'll erect a wall of propaganda. And as I said on my show on Sunday, don't think they won't do it, and don't think they can't, because they already have with Russiagate, Russian collusion. They erected a wall and convinced half the country that the Russians, elected Trump in 2016. I mean, it's just an insane idea that they managed to get traction, and a lot of people they honestly believe it. So the departure from reality has already happened for a lot of these people. So they will do this, and so the talking points, the slogans, the campaigns are being designed now, which is there'll be a teenaged girl. It's her first election, and she looks there at the camera. She says, "My vote counts. My vote counts. This president doesn't represent me. I want my voice of democracy to be heard. My vote wasn't counted. I postmarked it by November 3rd, and they're not counting it. And in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, whatever, they'll do every battleground state if they possibly can to basically delay or to bring the result into question and drag this on until, and in their mind, Tom, the Democrats believe that it's their just desert, because they, in their heart of hearts, believe that the election was unfairly taken from them in 2016 and in 2000, and also 2004 to a lesser degree with Kerry in Ohio. But they really believe that it's ordained and it's their
their sacred
reparations,
right
if you will.
Yeah, yeah, no, that generation in the Strauss and Howe model of the fourth turning, right? The generational model, the prophet generation becomes didactic and strident in their old age, and they're still in charge. They're still in power. They won't give up power.
Yes.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg refused to give up power until she died, even though she was incapable of doing the job. Joe Biden he's the poster child for everything that's completely wrong.
Exactly.
With the baby boomer generation, even though he's not technically a boomer, he's technically older than that. But they represent the ethos of the baby boomers, right? Same thing with Pelosi and the rest of them, and that is what has to change here. And they know that this is their last kick at the can. They know that if they don't get this done, they're not going to be able to do it in 2024. Okay, they're not going to be able to flip the House back in 2022. They already have the House, right? Like, where do they go from here? And I think that between that and the unbelievable levels of honest to God corruption are so off the charts that these people are just desperate to not face the music, because we're dealing with psychopaths who will deny reality until they're finally caught, and then they'll commit suicide first before they're overtaken. So, I don't know. I hear what you're saying, and this is part of the reason why I want to see him. I want to see Trump win states like Pennsylvania and New York by such large margins that it causes enough cognitive dissonance to really get people to go, whoa, okay, we were wrong. Yeah, this wasn't just 50,000 votes here, 20,000 votes there, and it's a completely different election. He loses Florida by 1 million people.
Right.
Okay. And I think he's going to lose Florida by 1 million people, because the Democrats right now are trending 800,000 votes behind where they were in 2016.
Yeah, and there's new voter registration bump for the Republicans in Florida. So that's a bad combination for the Democrats.
It's a terrible combination. And then you also have, I saw something the other day that Google searches for "can I change my vote" are spiking after the last debate. And every one of the major battleground states will allow you to change your vote, either postal ballot or in-person ballot. Some states even allow, because I guess your ballot is, somehow tied to you some way, that you can go back and change your vote. Like, crazy stuff.
That's why I'm against early voting and postal voting, because I think it's anathema to democracy. You should decide. You should get the full term to decide.
I agree with you completely.
Yeah.
And then I think we should all vote from home on a blockchain. Like, it's not hard. We don't
even. There's that too. Yeah.
And then we all vote at home on the Ethereum style blockchain that's open source, and then they can't cheat. And then if they did that, none of these people that we've talked about today, all these horrible power brokers and oligarchs, none of these people would be in power. Mm-hmm. The libertarians would be right about everything, because all of a sudden the world would look completely different. Like, oh, that's the way the world actually looks. I was on Fault Lines this morning with on Sputnik Radio with Jamal Thomas, and I made that point about, I want to see Trump win so big. Not because I want to see Trump win big because I'm being partisan, because I want to see him win so big that it destroys all of these fake narratives that we've been fed on both the left and the right, all across the political spectrum. And Jamal, of all people, looked at me and went, yeah, man, I actually agree with you about that. That would actually change a lot of things. I'm like, exactly.
That's the magic of Trump.
I agree.
It's counterintuitive. It doesn't make conventional sense to anyone, even to me or anybody I know. But somehow, that stone, when thrown into the middle of the pond or stream, creates such disturbance that it exposes, all of the sort of filth and toxic sludge and whatnot that's just been rancid for ages. So yeah, I agree with you.
Ready? 2 parts shitlord, 3 parts shitbag. And that's who Donald Trump is. And we elected him because of that.
Right.
We weren't like confused about what he was or who he was. We weren't confused. We're like, her? Well, let's take a flyer on him. Now, 4 years later, he hasn't burned the world down. He's his foreign policy has been, for the people who truly in the know about foreign policy, he's been pretty bad. But for most people, no new wars, fewer troops in Afghanistan now than then, fewer troops in Syria, pulling people out of Iraq, big picture stuff, pulling troops out of Germany. Yeah, he's antagonizing the Russians and he's pulled out of these treaties and all that stuff's terrible. Don't get me wrong. But when you really break it down to people who are not Six Sigma hardcore politicos like us, or Six Sigma away from the mean, to bring it back to the statistical discussion we had at the beginning of this, Trump's done pretty well, and he hasn't blown the world up. So why not give him another 4 years? And no one is going to blame him, and no rational person is going to blame him for COVID.
It's ridiculous.
It's a really bad strategy, and again tells you that these people who are running these like operations in the back room and like figuring out these plans or how they're going to like take over the world. They're really bad at it.
No, there is a degree of chaos there. There is.
Yeah. So
I'm gonna give you a good quote here, and if
sure.
if you want to leave on this or not, but I think you'll appreciate this tremendously.
Right. Lay it on me.
So I'm gonna quote. I'm not gonna tell you who it is. You'll probably be you'll probably understand when I tell you who said this, and you'll be pleasantly surprised. But this is what's said about what you were talking about in terms of you know who Trump is. You elected him for a reason because you wanted to basically put these other creatures to task, basically. So This is the quote: of all tyrannies, a tyranny sincerely exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. It would be better to live under robber barons than under omnipotent moral busybodies. The robber baron's cruelty may sometimes sleep. His cupidity may at some point be satiated. But those who torment us for our own good will torment us without end, for they do so with the approval of their own conscience. They may be more likely to go to heaven, yet at the same time likelier to make a hell on earth. This very kindness strings with intolerable insult, to be, quote, cured against one's will and cured of states which may not regard as disease, which one may not regard as disease. So is to be put on a level of those who have not yet reached the age of reason, or those who never will, to be classed with infants, imbeciles, and domestic animals. And guess who wrote that?
It sounds familiar, but I cannot remember.
So that's C.S. Lewis, great author. God in the Dock, Essays on Theology, Making of Modern Theology. So he's referring to kind of Trump. Trump is the kind of the robber baron in that, or it represents, you have the globalists, the World Economic Forum, who want to protect you from yourself.
Yep.
And then you have, dynasties and oligarchs will come and go, and they'll be here and then they're gone, and they're not going to keep their gaze on you forever. As George Orwell says, imagine a boot on your neck for all eternity.
Yep.
So.
Well, that's about as sobering a statement as to end on as possible. Patrick, I really appreciate you coming on this morning and doing this on such short notice. It was brilliant to catch up again, man. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's going to be a wild week, Tom.
It is. It is going to be just insane. And I'm trying to clear my decks for all the work that I have to do so I can spend some time doing the work that I kind of want to do. So we'll see what happens. All right. You have a great day, and we'll talk soon, man. Let's do this again sometime sooner than every, 6 months or whatever.
For sure. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you. Take care now. Well, that'll about do it for episode 56. I really appreciate Patrick coming on such short notice and giving such great commentary, especially about Brexit and Boris Johnson and all of that. I think that really adds to the discussion in a substantive way. As always, you guys can follow my work over at tomluongo.me. That's my blog. You can follow me on Twitter at TFL1728. You can also support the podcast and my work directly over at Patreon by signing up for one of two options, really. Either the the Gold, Goats, and Guns market reports, which happen every Wednesday and Sunday, which are kind of video podcasts where I do technical analysis and headline analysis, as well as every day I do what I call the Morning Munchings, which is a short blog post just to talk about the headlines and keep my head in the game. It's actually more of like my notebook of geopolitics and cryptocurrencies and the markets and everything that's happening. And then, of course, you can also sign up for the Gold, Goats, and Guns monthly investment newsletter, which is meant to tie all of this up into a portfolio strategy to help you make sense of a world going mad. So we'll be back next week. I've got a real special treat for next week. I'm just going to tease it a little bit, not what it's about. And I'm really looking forward to that talk. And you guys be well. Next week, we may or may not have a new president in the United States. The singularity may have collapsed, or it may have swallowed us whole. You guys be well. You take care. Keep your stick on the ice.